Graylog elevates enterprise-level cybersecurity through its comprehensive SIEM, centralized log management, and API security solutions. Built on the Graylog platform, Graylog Security combines SIEM, security analytics, threat detection, and incident response capabilities. Unlike traditional SIEMs, which offer complex and costly setups, Graylog Security simplifies security and operational challenges with an optimal blend of licensing, people, and infrastructure costs. To see a demo, visit securityweekly.com/Graylog. It is time to make network and security simpler and more flexible. Ariaka helps enterprises modernize, optimize, and transform their network and security experience with Ariaka Unified SASE as a service, the only solution that delivers performance, agility, simplicity, and security without trade-offs. Ariaka Unified SASE as a Service is a purpose-built, cloud-based offering that securely connects users and applications anywhere in the world. Visit securityweekly.com/Ariaka, that's ARYAKA, to learn more. Digital threats evolve rapidly, making it difficult for security teams to keep pace. Tying security automation and orchestration is different from traditional SOAR. It allows teams to move faster and make better decisions in real time. With Tynes, analysts and engineers have everything they need to automate the processes they're closest to, regardless of complexity. Built by security practitioners for security practitioners, Tynes powers mission-critical security workflows at McKesson, Canva, and Mars. Start building for free at securityweekly.com/Tynes. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. This interview is sponsored by ThreatLocker. Danny Jenkins joins us today to talk about application Allowlisting and everything else ThreatLocker has to offer. Danny is the CEO and co-founder of ThreatLocker. Welcome to the show, Danny.
Thank you for inviting me today, Adrian.
Yeah, this one I'm particularly interested in. This is a technology I haven't really looked at or thought a lot about for a while, but I think most people who've been in the industry for a while are familiar with this category of product. And I always like to say, like, they're not really bad ideas or concepts in InfoSec, but there can be bad implementations of that. So I always find it interesting when somebody comes back to an idea and rebuilds it, with the benefit of hindsight. So it's kind of where I want to start out. I think a lot of people probably remember Bit9 from back in the day, maybe Savant Protection, things like that. First of all, what attracted you to, and you guys do a lot more than just allow listing. So I don't want to limit it, the conversation just to that, but what attracted you to that particularly? And did you study a lot, what previous products in this category had done, and decide to do things differently?
Yeah, so at the time, all I seemed to be doing was, what I was supposed to be doing was ethical hacking, but what I ended up doing was being called to recover from ransomware. And every single time it was the same question, what could I have done to not get hit by ransomware? And they all had antivirus, they had EDRs, they had all these tools in place, and they still got the ass handed to them, if you like. So what I said was, you got to use whitelisting, you got to block everything. That's the way to secure your system. And I got pushback and pushback and pushback. And at the time, I hadn't used Allowlisting in 10 years. So I was like, let me go out. There's got to be products on the market. There's got to be great products. And so I started downloading things and testing things. And it was the same crap. It was just, it was really hard to even get started. And it was really hard to deal with updates, Windows updates, Office updates, Chrome updates, Zoom updates. And then even the approval processes were taking a long time. So I sat there and said, well, if I could deploy this in a few hours of my time and I didn't have to deal with these updates being blocked and new software could be approved in minutes without worrying about all of the dependencies, this would be a perfect solution. So I went off and said, well, we got to build this. That's what we've got to do. And that was actually the founding idea of ThreatLocker, was how do we make Allowlisting easy and manageable for every type of business? And when we started, we had two goals. How do we get this to work for a small company? And how do we get this to work for a large company? And we knew if we could do that, the whole world could use it.
Yeah, and I love you. You've already covered a bunch of my questions there, because the first question is how did they do it badly? Like, what was wrong with the original approach? And I think most people who were around back then knew the overhead was just too much, and so it ended up being a technology that was relegated to like a niche area, like something that didn't change too often, like POS systems.
And what they did wrong was really think of it as a piece of software. And when you buy an antivirus or an EDR, you know that I'm buying an agent or licensing an agent to run on my computer. But what I'm really paying for every year is the 100 people, the 200 people who are looking for all the threats and
Yeah.
updating that agent and making sure that it continues to detect things. And I accept that it's not going to detect everything, but I'm paying for the best efforts of those people. And every other allow listing solution on the market was giving you a piece of software. And if you called them and said, hey, my Windows update got blocked, they would say, well, you have to create a rule or you have to add those new hashes in.
Yeah.
And what we did from day one was say, well, you can't do that. Like, we have to figure out how they don't do work. So instead of you as an IT guy trying to upload every single Windows update, we have 120 people in ThreatLocker Labs. All they do all day is track software updates, information about software, what countries they were developed in, what
Mhm.
DLLs. Every time there's an update for Windows or Chrome or Office, or I think we've got research information on 40,000 apps and every historic version of like 3,500 apps. And that is what takes away the work. And we realize that it is a piece of software, but ultimately it's a subscription service. So you do less work and we do most of the work for you. And we're not permitting things in the background for you. We're doing it in an economy of scale level where we only have to track the Windows updates once, and that applies to all of our customers.
Yeah, and I recall my good friend Javad Malik, when we were both at 451 Research, did a report, did some research on shelfware, on why security products became shelfware. Never got fully implemented, or never reached the full value that was expected of them. And what they all had in common was they put too much on the buyer. There's just too much load, too much labor for them to, so it was exactly the things you would expect. It was DLP tools, SIEM, IDS, you know, stuff that pumped out a lot of noise and required a lot of tuning. I think this kind of fell in that category as well, right? That's what you're describing here.
Always did. And actually, we were very aware of that at the beginning. Shelfware is not what we want to become. And I always say good salespeople sell software, good products get renewals. And one
Yeah,
of the things we've been very proud of is our renewal is up at like 99.96% month over month. So it's really, really
that's
sticky.
it. Churn rate. You got to watch that churn.
Yeah. And one of the things we realize is, hey, what do I want from the buyer? So we say to the buyer, hey, we want an hour a week from you for 5 weeks. Now, if you're deploying 20,000 endpoints, it's probably going to be 12 weeks or something like that.
Mhm.
And if you're deploying 100 endpoints, it's probably going to be 2 or 3 weeks. But roughly, we say an hour a week for 5 weeks. We're going to the first week you're going to deploy this agent out, and it's going to do nothing but learn. And then we're going to start simulating your environment. We're going to show you what's happening. We're going to build policies out automatically, and then we're going to lock you down. And before you lock down, you get to see a simulation, make sure nothing breaks, and then we walk you through how to permit new software. And that's what we ask for them, and that's why it's so successful. It's because we really make sure the buyer is successful in their delivery.
Now, how did you think about building out this product? Because you're fairly late stage at this point. You're Series D, look like a good sized company, and there's a lot of other things that ThreatLocker does. Just want some help, kind of understanding the rationale behind building this out. Like you've got a network control piece, right? Like a
Yeah.
dynamic firewall piece, and then if you could explain ring fencing to me.
So we started off with the allow listing, and it was very simple. So we were a small business at the time, and then we realized that people aren't buying features anymore; they're buying platforms. So they want a
Mhm.
platform to do and
Yeah,
you don't have. There can be multiple platforms, but you need a platform that delivers best of breed in certain areas. And our core thesis here at ThreatLocker is to change the paradigm of security from default allow to default deny. So we started with
Mm.
blocking untrusted
I
software,
like
and
that.
of course, as soon as we did this, all of the EDR companies came out and said, well, what happens if someone calls PowerShell from Office and runs a script? And we said, well, that's a fair point. So we started saying, well, why does Office need to talk to PowerShell? Why does PowerShell need to see all of our files? And we started this concept of what do applications actually need to do? And if we take those permissions away that they don't need, it doesn't affect the user, but if there is something goes wrong, it's going to block the vulnerability being exploited. So we say Office can't talk to PowerShell. PowerShell can't see our file system. We can add exceptions. PowerShell can't go out to the internet except Office
Right.
365 or whatever sites you do your scripts from. Reg serve can't go out to the internet, Zoom can't talk to PowerShell, and all of this hardening of applications, controlling what they can do, has really taken away probably 99% of vulnerabilities. Well, it doesn't take away the vulnerability, but
Yeah.
it stops them being exploited. And the reason it does that is because they literally can get exploited, but they're contained within themselves, so they can't do any further damage.
And it's a basic least privilege approach, right? It's like SolarWinds, for example, like all these breaches, these supply chain issues. Log4j is another example. The companies you see coming out of it, with the least stress, tend to be those who have very tight outbound policies. They say, okay, yes, this needs to talk outbound, but only to get updates. So why would we allow it to go to the whole internet, right?
Well, that's it. Orion was a perfect example. We had customers with Orion ring fenced. All they saw was one entry going to an AWS server that wasn't in the permitted list of of services it can talk to. It could talk to SolarWinds.com, but it couldn't talk to this random AWS server. No, nothing else happened. They didn't
Yeah.
even know it was bad. They're just like, I don't know why this is trying to talk to this server, but it's blocked anyway. And that kind of security is always going to harden you. The Exchange vulnerability was another example where you could literally push out ransomware through a GPO to an entire org just by pointing in an Exchange server. We're able to block that just by ring fencing and actually whitelisting. In two different ways we block that, the permitted software. And then we start getting into the network stuff. How do we control the network layer better? Because we saw so many companies getting hit by ransomware where there was one rogue device on the LAN. Somebody didn't patch their machine. Someone didn't run the security software on the machine, and it was able to connect to a file share and still encrypt files or still steal data.
Yeah, and that just kind of goes to the heart of zero trust, right? And I think that's one of the one of many good reasons to go through breaches in scenarios like this, and really identify well, and it's why you started the company, right? Is doing this root cause analysis, like how is this ransomware? Where are the pressure points? Where can you take away, the power to spread so quickly and easily throughout the organization?
And I think the reality is everyone has to understand it's impossible to detect everything that's bad. And someone actually put an ad in front of me yesterday, which we didn't run with, but it was a really good ad in my mind, but it was too complicated. It said it had a chat GPT window up, an AI window up, and it said, write me a program that copies my files to Google Cloud. And then it asked the question, is this good software or bad software? And
Oh yeah,
from a behavioral point of view, who knows? Like
yeah.
an EDR certainly can't know because it could be a backup program or it could be a data exfil program. And what we really focus on is it's irrelevant. Why is it? If it's needed, if it's good, your IT team is going to allow it. If it's bad, they're not.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean that's dual use, right? Anything that's useful or powerful tends to have uses for both good and bad, which is why living off of land is a thing, and administrative tools get abused by bad guys. But then there's also cases where if you're standardized on any desk, TeamViewer should raise some eyebrows when it shows up, right?
Or it should be blocked
Yeah,
rather than someone
right,
running
right.
down saying, why did you open TeamViewer? Just block it. And then the user say, hey, I need TeamViewer and you can review it. And that's kind of what we're approaching. If you just block
Yeah,
what's not needed, it doesn't harm the user because they shouldn't be using TeamViewer. And it just harms the attacker. And that's the great thing about this. When you work on a least privileged basis, whether it's ring fencing, whether it's Allowlisting, whether it's blocking down network ports, and that's been absolutely amazing at stopping cyber attacks. This idea of having a dynamic ACL that tracks the source IP
mhm,
addresses so you can close ports. It's just something nobody else has ever done. I can't believe no one else thought of it before. But it's so magical because it means someone can come in your network, they can do a port scan, and every port is closed. And then you come in and you can immediately
yeah.
connect to your server.
Right, right. Yeah, that's I've seen a few things like that, where there's some kind of but usually you need some well, and I imagine you do it with some kind of agent, like I've seen, but only in like an administrator case. Like I can't remember the name of the company, but it would only open SSH when you needed it, and then it would close it once you were done.
Yeah, and you can often do VPNs as that to kind of route around it. But our thing is, hey, we're just going to have an agent on the server. We're going to have an agent on the client, and the server
Yeah,
is going to authentic. When the client tries to connect to SSH or to RDP, the server is going to connect back and say, "Well, I need you to authenticate that you're actually in my organization." And if it can't, it's just going to say port closed.
Yeah, totally
And
makes
that's,
sense.
and it doesn't, and if the IP address changes, it stops allowing that IP address access to the server. So all of these least privileges technologies really help. And we have our EDR, we have probably, I would argue, the best MDR in the world, with the best response times and the best team. But at the end of the day, the
Cyber
best
hero, right? Is that what
the
you call
cyber
the
hero
MDR?
team, yeah,
Mhm.
based here in Orlando, Florida, 24
Mhm.
hours a day. Their average response time is less than 60 seconds, and they are really good. And they, but even though they know you, it doesn't matter how fast you run. Someone's on your server trying to run ransomware. You can't win that race unless you're blocking by default.
Yeah, yeah, there's no SOC fast enough. Like, yeah, your prevention needs, you either need to have prevention in place or detection that's fully automated. And at RSA this year, I heard a lot of people talking about wanting to get their customers to fully automate blocking, and based on detections. And I just, I don't think it's there. I don't think it's good enough where it's not going to just start breaking all kinds of stuff.
Well, and
It's
that's it.
I've not seen any detection that's false positive free. So how could you fully automate blocking based off of that?
It's kind of a, I think you put things in place to limit your exposure. So we have policies in ThreatLocker, for example, like if there's 2,000 files change or 500 files change in X
Yeah,
period of time,
thresholds.
then automatically to shut their storage off until it can be, and send an alert to the SOC to review, because in that case they're saying the damage is worse than the possible risk. But even that, when we put that live first internally, we had to increase those thresholds for our
Mm.
developers, because when you compile code in Visual Studio, it writes thousands of files.
Yep.
So automated detection is not that great. And then again, what does it come down to? Did I just block my backup from sending my service to the internet? Now I've got
Yeah.
no backup because I decided that this was malware because it was reading lots of files. It's better to know this is good. This is exactly the behavior it's supposed to do. And if it steps out the lane, let's just stop it from doing it.
Yeah. So one question here, the endpoint is a fairly crowded space, so how do you tackle that? I remember back when companies, the next gen AV companies were new. This was a big question. I was covering endpoint security for 451 research as an industry analyst at the time, and the constant question was like, okay, when do you? I don't see people paying for AV and next gen AV, to sit side by side, because those next gen companies hadn't built the EPP stuff, so they couldn't replace like the McAfee and the Semantic at the time. So they had to live alongside with it. So how do you deal with the fact that the endpoint is a little crowded with AV and EDR, and this would be yet another agent on it?
So, and most of the time when we onboard a customer, and it's changing a little bit, we would onboard them using what we call ThreatLocker Protect, which is our network, our application control, our ring fencing, our network control, and maybe we'll do some of the EPM stuff as well. And quite often you're displacing something like an EPM at the same time. So they're like, okay, I'm getting to remove an agent. I'm actually saving costs here, and I'm in a better position. Then we added ThreatLocker EDR, and we didn't push it too hard to begin with. We said, look, go out and use ThreatLocker, pair it with CrowdStrike. It's fine. It'll work perfectly. And what we're doing is we're looking for everything that's good and blocking everything else, and they're still looking for your bad stuff. What we found more and more over the last 12 months, and mainly since we launched the MDR service, actually, is more people are actually ditching their EDR and it's saying, well, look, I actually get no real alerts on my current EDR
Mhm.
because ThreatLocker blocks by default anyway. So let me use
Right.
ThreatLocker's EDR. It saves me some money on the back end. It reduces my endpoint footprint. And some companies are still saying, I want best of breed. I've used CrowdStrike for 5 years. I'm not going to kick CrowdStrike. I know it's a sensitive topic at the moment, but I'm not going to
Yeah.
kick CrowdStrike out because I've used them. And we say, okay, well, that's good. I think the priority for me is to make sure that you're focusing on the least privileged stuff and the EDR. If you want to use our EDR, it's always here. You can turn it on. I always like to get people to do a test. So we say, hey, turn on our EDR, turn on our MDR behind it, and then do some bad stuff. I don't mean like
Yeah.
real bad stuff, but maybe try and run a version of Mimikatz that's not going to kill you, or download advanced IP scanner and try and do a network scan and see who calls you first and see who takes response to your machine first. And that's often a very easy win, because I was on a call with a bank and we did the same thing, and they got an email from their current MDR and EDR provider, which I won't name, an email saying, hey, we noticed suspicious activity. Someone's running Mimikatz on your computer at the end of an hour call where we'd done the bad stuff at the beginning. Whereas our
Yeah.
team had immediately gone on the phone to them saying, hey, we're isolating a machine that's running Mimikatz.
Nice, nice. Yeah, and that's the best way to get a sale, right? Is to show that the product and the service work. And yeah, back, I used to run a consulting company, and I used to sell my services by doing exactly what you're describing, except the MSSP would never call them up, and and they would never get alerts. So that's yeah, I think it's something a lot of organizations need to get better at is understanding where their products are working or not. So any vendor that can show them that can actively show them that, I think already they're much better off. A lot of these organizations, you hear these horror stories where it's been plugged into the wrong, the IDS has been plugged into the wrong span port for the last 3 years, and no one noticed until they had a breach. And yeah, so it's and understanding where the value is, how do you know that you're getting value from an EDR? Especially after you plug something in, that's overlapping, or is going to prevent a lot of the potential stuff that could happen.
You don't,
It's a hard
unfortunately.
problem.
And it's always been the way of endpoint protection. This is what we'd like to change with the zero trust approach: is what is the best antivirus, what is the best EDR. It's the guy who has the biggest marketing budget and is the biggest company.
Yeah,
And they because you can't tell, are they the best at detecting? Yes, there's various studies and there's various, and every one of them's got a
testing
different
or
opinion.
yeah, and
It's
maybe one company's best this month, but then next month it's like a lot of it's very transitory.
But that's the nice thing about a zero trust approach, though, is you know what you're getting. You can see it. You can
Right.
say, okay, I tried to run something that wasn't trusted. It was blocked. I know it's going to block malware because everything I've tried to run, it's blocked.
You can
And
validate
I
it
know,
easily. Yeah.
and it's not upsetting your users either, because they're not. Sometimes when you've got an EDR or an antivirus, you can do the same thing every day, and
Yeah.
you open up the same program on your computer, and it's some Windows 95 based bad application that was written in VB.4 or something, and it works every day. And then one day, a hacker uses a sample of code that's also in that program, and suddenly your payroll or your line of business app just stops working. When you're actually operating on a zero trust approach, it doesn't matter because you've learned this. It's in your environment. It's trusted now, and it doesn't just stop working one day because a bad guy happened to have a similar signature.
Yeah. Very, very, yeah. Yeah. Anything where you can validate, I used to work in the deception market, and that was a great thing there is, we'd say, put it in right before your pen test and you'll get your validation, right? It'll set off alarms. And I imagine same thing here, do a POC of this right before you have a pen test. And I bet the results are pretty interesting.
Yeah, the first question every pen tester says about ThreatLocker is you need to turn off ThreatLocker before we can do a pen test.
That's not how that works.
It's funny because everyone says, "Oh, we got our results back from our pen test," and it's like, how were they able to run software? Oh, we had to turn it off. It's it's
That's yeah. I used to run into that too, where they're like, yeah, we're gonna put some exceptions for your IP so you can scan our stuff. I was like, what are you looking to get out of this? Do you want to know how good your security is, or like I don't understand we're just augmenting your vulnerability management program, like, and that's all it ends up being is they want to see a list of patches that they missed or
well, it makes the pen. Everyone wants to show value. The pen tester gets value then as well.
yeah
And I, I,
yeah
I think it's good to know, hey, there's patches, so you need to do a scan. You need to know what patches are missing, but it's not really a pen test at that point. It's a vulnerability scan, and it's it's just called a pen test, and then you can say we completed a pen test.
Yeah. Now you also have privilege management piece of this and storage control piece. That there's a few more pieces here we haven't touched on.
Yeah, so the EPM, it's actually one of the things that come to ThreatLocker. The amount, I would say, probably about 30% of customers that come to ThreatLocker come to look at our EPM. So you can elevate software without being a local admin. You can allow certain programs to
Okay.
elevate. You can temporarily request elevation. And that's very, very common that people come to us and ask for that piece. And every single time they say, we're only interested in that, we're not interested in the allow listing. And then within the demo, they change their mind and say, oh, I need all of it. and suddenly they buy EPM and Allowlisting. But the EPM, really, really powerful. It's cool. It learns, it integrates with the Allowlisting. So if a user wants to run
Mhm.
new software, say they download 7-zip, for example, and they'll get a pop-up saying, hey, 7-zip's been blocked. This is where 7-zip was made. This is what it will have access to. Do you want to request it from your administrator? So they request it from the administrator. The administrator says, okay, we're going to allow 7-zip. I'm going to ring fence it at the same time so it can't talk out to the internet. Oh, and I know 7-zip needs to be a local admin to install. So I'm going to allow you to run the installer for the next
Mhm.
12 hours as an admin. So you don't have to call me again and ask for my password. And that's really cool. And then if you've got an application that needs to run permanently as an administrator, you can do that
Mhm.
while ring fencing it.
And I think that's something that's really overlooked in security is adding a time component to things. Like I used to work for a vendor that did SaaS security. And just a whole idea of I'm going to create a public link to this file that exists forever, and anyone with a link can click it and look at it. When all I really needed was people in the next meeting for the next hour to view that file, and then after that hour, I could care less what happens to that link. But the default is this exists forever, so it sits out there forever. And what you just mentioned, like I need to use this app, for the next 30 minutes or for the next 24 hours or something like that. I think that's hugely powerful.
And actually, one of the things we recently changed in our MDR was the or EDR, and I guess, and that goes to the MDR, was the inability to add permanent exceptions. And technically, you can add them 10 years out, but when you go in, it says, okay, do you want to add it for a week, a month, a year, like an hour?
Right.
Because exceptions being added permanently are a problem. And the same with our application control. Internally, what ThreatLocker does is when we approve software for staff, even if they say it's permanent, we approve it for a year and then it gets reviewed. It's like, okay, do
Yeah.
you still need it a year later? Because it's very easy to say, well, this person's in payroll or suddenly they move to accounts receivable. And why do they still have access to the payroll app? So we always set those timed
Exactly.
policies on everything we do. Fortunately, sometimes it's not viable for companies, but it's not a bad idea to have at least a review of what's in the list. And when you do make exceptions, make them expire.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Any kind of exceptions, with regardless of what it is, maybe it's a patch, that you can't install for some reason. Like all that should be revisited at some point. None of it should be excused forever. That's how tech debt piles up. That's how eternal blue is still sitting around at some companies. Somebody
It,
created an exception for it at some point, and it's still sitting there.
and it's terrifying. And then the storage stuff. It's actually the storage stuff is really interesting because one of the things we've done in ThreatLocker is we've created this unified audit, and the unified audit basically lets any IT person or administrator go in and they can search everything, all network calls. So every time you got a laptop at home, it goes out to the internet. You open a port, and inbound traffic happens. You can see that within minutes in one central console across your entire company. You can see that by executions, elevations.
Nice.
Um, you can also see it registry changes and then storage access. So if somebody copies a file to a USB drive, if I go home, and let's say I'm allowed to use USB drives, I copy a file, it'll tell me the file I copied, was the drive encrypted, the serial number, the user, the
Yeah.
program, everything that happened on there. And that's what the unified audit gets used for the most, seeing who accessed this file. Then we take all that data and then you can build policies. Now, the policies people mostly use are, hey, I want to block USB drives, which is a reasonable policy. But you can also get really, really granular. So you can say, I only want Veeam to access my backup share. So if a user tries to browse to it, they
No.
can't see it. And it's so detailed, it's unbelievable. You can see so much granular control of only Office can access docx or Word can access docx files and only Excel can access XLS files. And that's probably the extreme. I've got a medical system that needs to access this file and only it can do it. So you can go into storage and you can set granular policies like you couldn't imagine. And it's great because we did this whole test. We said, okay, I'm going to use no ThreatLocker product and I'm just going to create storage policies so only Office can access this and only PowerShell can access this, and only my backup software can access this. And then we ran all the ransomware we could throw at it. And even that by
Yeah.
itself, it destroyed the machine. All the files were intact.
Yeah. 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 It's this is a concept. I actually did a workshop years ago where the whole concept was, that maybe malware's delicate. Maybe it's fragile because there's so many assumptions it has to make. It's assuming your system works in a certain way. It assumes, Windows sits in, C:\\Windows. Like the moment you start changing any of these things that malware have to assume are true, it starts breaking. Malware doesn't work anymore. And the whole workshop was about, can we stop ransomware just using Windows itself, just changing configurations and things like that.
Make their job harder. The harder their job is,
Exactly.
the more likely they are to quit. We actually got a Teams message. So somebody had got onto a computer using Screen Connect. So Screen Connect was it was used by the IT support company. I don't know if they had dual factor or how they got on, but I assume that they got a password, they got the credentials, they got into Screen Connect. They logged into a user's machine, and the machine wasn't locked, so they didn't even need to know the user's password. And then they started running a bunch of programs. And they were just using ThreatLocker, Allowlisting, ring fencing, protect. They weren't using EDR or anything. And they were on there for a good few hours. And after a few hours, they literally sent a message on Teams to the Everywhere group. It said, being as though ThreatLocker is causing us problems, your Windows computers are useless to us. And it was like, or something along those lines. We have the screenshots from it. And the customer, the whole company came into this Teams message from an employee that the attack had been on their machine all night. And thankfully they quit. And I'm sure they could have done things. I mean, they're on the machine, they're physical access, they've got access to a web browser, they could probably upload files. They didn't. But if you can make their job hard enough, they just quit. I mean, and if you get them to quit, you win.
Yeah, I can't imagine marketing better than that. Like, here, look at the attacker come, get frustrated, and give up.
It's the same thing with your house security, your car security. You leave your car unlocked, you leave the key in it. It's a very easy snatch. You put your key in your house, you got cameras on your house. It's going to be a lot harder. Not impossible. Nothing's impossible, but a lot harder for someone to get in. And our job is to make it as difficult as possible while making the user's job not interrupted.
Yeah, and I love that you do have those stories. Do customers let you like anonymize and tell some of these stories? Because I feel like we don't even get that many details about breaches, but I feel like we should get more information about how people are winning, how people are stopping stuff, but because there's no SEC requirement to share your wins, like we I would love to see more hopeful stuff out there.
And sometimes we do, and sometimes we use them. So this one was actually, it was one of the proposals that, like, I had the other proposal. It was one of the proposals that was put in front of me the other day, and I didn't go with that one either. But it's we will use it somewhere because it was a really good story. I love it when they say these are the things when you pay your ransom, and they say these are the things you should have done to stop getting ransomware, and they say use Allowlisting.
Do they? I haven't seen that.
Yeah. Oh, I got a chat. So when you pay your $100,000 ransom or $500,000 ransom, whatever it may be, quite often the companies will give you a list of things that you should have done.
Right. Because they're pitching it as a pen test in some cases, right?
No, I mean, they can justify their morals however they want. I mean, they just destroyed you. So, but they're trying to be, hey, we're a nice business. We just screwed you, and we're gonna take your money, but we're gonna be nice and tell you. I think the reason they're doing it is a little bit more nefarious. I think it's when you don't do all those things, they can come back and say, well, we told you so already.
But yeah, so again, justifying it to themselves so they can sleep at night, maybe.
Yeah. But you quite often see them, and we've got some of those screenshots where they've sent these things in from customers who weren't using ThreatLocker, who signed up after they got hacked. They got given a list of things they should have done, and then they went and searched, well, what is whitelisting? Let me go and look at this.
Well, it's too rare. We don't have enough vendors come in here and talk about customer wins, so I love to hear it when that happens. And Danny, thank you so much for joining me on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
Again, thank you for inviting me.
Make sure you visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker to learn more. And don't go anywhere. We're coming right back with a few more videos from Black Hat.